Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Professor Emeritus at the University of Chicago, Charles Lipson. Charles, thank you so much for joining me.
I always enjoy it, Brittany.
I'm especially lucky to be talking to you this week because you happen to be in Chicago, where the DNC has officially kicked off. First, bring us to the atmosphere of the Windy City. What is it like? Is that excitement palpable? Describe it.
If you're a Democrat, it's palpable. If you're a business owner, you're buying plywood. But that actually brings us to the first point about yesterday, which was that there were about 20,000 protesters pro-Palestine, anti-Israel, but it was relatively calm. So this was not anywhere near 1968. Their next march is planned for Thursday, and of course we don't know what will happen then. But so far, there have been a lot of plywood up, and I think what people are scared of is that the police force has been reduced by 1,000 people due to retirements and, Soros-type prosecutors and police not feeling that they're being backed. But there have been law enforcement that have come in from all over the country, actually, in case there's disorder here. So.
And I know that there have been concerns up until this point that the DNC this year would look a lot like the DNC in 1968 when there were protesters, when there was chaos. Is there any parallel to what you've seen in the past day to 1968?
Well, people thought there were going to be parallels, but so far there haven't been. In part for a variety of reasons. One is that the Convention Hotel in 1968 was next to the biggest park in the city. It faced the park and the lake. So you could gather as demonstrators right outside where all the delegates and the president and so forth were. That was the Grant Park, named after Ulysses Grant, opposite the Conrad Hilton Hotel. I had a friend who was an aide in that to the Democrats in that convention, and he went into the hotel, and when he saw people on higher floors throwing typewriters out the window at protesters, he said, "I'm getting out of here," and he did. But it was also Mayor Richard J. Daley the Elder, the mayor, who believed in the use of force, and so it was which is quite different from now. So I think we just don't know what will happen. The other parallel besides the location is that the Democrats are nominating their vice president, who is associated with the policies closely associated with the policies of the incumbent administration. And that's what the protesters are protesting against. They were protesting against Lyndon Johnson and his vice president, Hubert Humphrey, who was the nominee that time. And now they're protesting against Biden and Kamala Harris, the vice president, who is being the nominee this time. So there are parallels, but so far, none of the violence.
Let's talk about the first night of the DNC Monday. It was supposed to be all about Joe Biden. It was a late night. It was running overtime. Biden finished his speech past midnight on the East Coast. What did you think of the night? What are some of your takeaways?
I would call it the night of the living dead. That is, Biden and Hillary are the living dead of the Democratic Party. And but I thought they did a pretty good job of passing the baton to the new generation, which is AOC, and then there was a surprise visit by Kamala Harris. So there was a lot of enthusiasm. It wasn't just a memorial service for Biden, who was like those typewriters thrown out the window of the Democratic nominating convention. He concentrated his ammunition on Trump. Obviously, he's going to say, we did a good job in our administration. Kamala Harris will be great. there's a problem there, and focusing on Trump gives is a partial solution. And the problem, which will recur throughout the campaign, is that she wants to run on the future, but she's closely associated with the past, which people, according to polls, don't like. So she has to make the future vague, and every time she specifies something about that future, it's very far on the left. It takes real incompetence to fail to exploit that, but so far the Trump administration has shown that incompetence.
I want to talk about that a little bit because in that speech where he was expected to pass the baton, it was largely about his legacy. And he said we, and by we, he meant Kamala and I passed this. We accomplished this. We did this for you. Then at the end of the speech, the second half, he said, and Harris and Walz will continue doing X, Y, and Z, basically continuing the Biden administration. The Biden legacy is what that seemed. So how in the next 3 days or the next days leading up to the election, do you think Harris will attach herself like Biden did as a continuation? Will she separate herself? And how does she do that after that speech?
She won't mention it very much, except for the triumphs. She's closely associated not only because she was vice president, because some of the biggest expenditure programs were a tie vote, and she broke the tie as the vice president. Well, every vice president's going to vote for what the president says, but she has her fingerprints all over these inflationary spending bills. So her goal will be to say, we're moving forward. Everything is about the future. Donald Trump is about the past. And so the more she looks back at the Biden administration, the more she's about the past. And it's not a very popular past. It is with the Democrats who are in the hall at the United Center, where the Bulls play basketball and the Blackhawks play hockey. It's a beautiful center, and they do, I should say, since I mentioned earlier the Conrad Hilton Hotel, the hotels for the convention delegates are at the convention center, not the United Center, but near the lakefront, and they're pretty isolated. You can really block them off, so it's not possible for the demonstrators to really attack the hotels very easily. So in the hall, there's a huge amount of enthusiasm. And the biggest enthusiasm was when Hillary Clinton got revved up the crowd with "Lock 'em up." And we should really talk a little about that.
Well, let's talk about it. I mean, if we remember, "Lock her up" was a chant when it was Trump v. Clinton back in 2016. Now the crowd turned that on its head and they chanted "Lock him up" while she was speaking. What did you make of that?
I made the same thing you just did, which is Trump rallies started that. And what you're seeing is the use of the criminal justice system to solve what are essentially political disputes. That's a terrible thing. It's what Trump and his backers call lawfare, and there's no question that there is lawfare against Trump. When you have the third ranking member of the Department of Justice resign his position to take a mid-level position in the New York prosecutor's office to prosecute Trump. By the way, Judge Merchan's case, he has yet to sentence Trump, and he still, for reasons that are inexplicable, has a gag order on Trump. What's to be gagged? The jury's gone. It's just the judge. So if he sentences Trump to jail, you're going to see a lot of Trump supporters who think this is banana republic stuff where you lock up the chief political opponent. And they revved up that case. It was two misdemeanors that were the statute of limitations had expired. They hooked it up to an unknown felony. They wouldn't tell the jury. This will all be overturned if it gets to a serious federal court. But the whole idea is to lock him up now, or at least tar him with this lawfare. But again, the Trump people who were saying lock her up in 2016 don't come to this with clean hands.
Let's talk about all that cheering last night, because there was the lock him up chant. I heard USA chants. There were thank you Joe chants. The DNC was running really late last night, and they reportedly blamed it on the applause. It pushed President Biden past prime time on the East Coast. What do you make of that, that the sitting president, the night was supposed to be all about him, was pushed past 11 here in New York?
Well, bad timing, and long past the early bird special that now seems to be his dinner time. Remember, he was accused, and they really didn't say this wasn't true, of being a 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. president. But it's just bad timing. But really, who is watching this anyway? There's just no surprises at all. If conventions don't have surprises, then all they are is a kind of stage spectacle. And so it's not surprising that Steven Spielberg is kind of running this. But you should time things for applause, right? One of the great radio shows, the Jack Benny show, the writers said we knew how much laughter we would get for these jokes, and we timed our script to make room for that. Again, this has a history. When George McGovern was finally nominated, I think he gave his speech at 2 a.m. I mean, it's just bad planning.
I used to work in live TV, and there was a rundown, and if you were heavy by a certain point, you would start taking things out of the rundown, and that's what they appear to do. I know a few people that were supposed to be slated ended up being cut, but the front page of the New York Post said this today: past his bedtime, Dems deliver final insult by pushing Biden's angry, bitter speech to midnight. Do you think that's what that was, or just poor planning?
It was poor planning. They didn't push him to past midnight. And the whole day was really devoted. What they wanted to say was, well done, old fellow. We're glad you came in saying this would be a bridging presidency. The problem is it's now Trump who wants to say it is a bridge and it connects back. Harris is really Biden's second term. It's Harris who wants to blow up the bridge, but she doesn't want to say what's on the other side. Where does this rainbow and pot of gold end, and what's in it? And so far, she's managed to avoid it. The media has just been absolutely feckless and praising her to the skies. They will eventually start to say, "Hey, give us a chance to ask you some questions." But that's going to be a problem for her, because she's never shown her ability to do extemporaneous talk very well.
I want to talk about that a little bit, because when we saw the RNC a month ago, there was palpable excitement within the GOP. Right now, there's palpable excitement within the Democratic Party. But when this excitement fizzles out, do you think Democrats will ever have to reckon with what happened in the past 2 months? So let's break it down again, because it does seem like a lifetime. President Biden had that disastrous debate performance, which essentially led to a pressure campaign that led to him dropping out of the race, in a race that he won the primary. I mean, I do have to note that voters did want him, or the majority of them wanted him to drop out after that performance. But there was not an open convention, and within 48 hours, Vice President Kamala Harris was already the likely nominee. So when the excitement subsides, what does this do to the legacy of the Democratic Party? And, what does this mean? What precedent does this set?
I think it's stable in the same way a bicycle is stable. It's stable only as it's moving forward. Nobody's paying any attention to this because the media moved on, and understandably so. She has never won a single primary vote in her history, and her big problem really is not just that she was nominated through a kind of modern equivalent of a vape-filled room, but that she has no accomplishments. I mean, if you were to ask Democrats, name her accomplishments, they would be dumbstruck. And yet, Trump has been unable to exploit that. That's not just a problem of the media. That's Trump's lack of discipline, doing everything to make it a personal attack on her. That's alienating to a lot of people, especially educated women who find it offensive. But the key thing really is that this is the starkest difference between presidential candidates in modern history. She is also the furthest left candidate, and her ticket is the furthest left because Waltz doesn't balance. He reinforces that essentially democratic socialist, European style socialism, which is at the heart of the Harris ticket. And the fact that Trump, who has an advantage on virtually all these issues except abortion, has failed to focus like a laser on these issues where he is ahead, is just of political malpractice.
Like you said, most voters would say that President Trump would be better equipped at handling these big issues like the economy, like inflation, like immigration, amongst other things. But it seems like as of now, this ticket and this party, the Democratic ticket, the Democratic Party, seems to be very heavy on what people are calling vibes and momentum, a little light on policy, because as of yesterday, this is what Jackie Heinrich, a reporter with Fox, posted. On the opening night of the DNC, Harris's campaign website has no policy section. There are bios for Harris and Walz, a tab to donate, a tab to volunteer, and a merch store. There's clearly been a honeymoon phase here. So when do you think that honeymoon phase is over, and then there's going to be questions about the Harris-Walz policy and how that stacks up to what a second term of Trump would look like?
I think it would normally end on when the serious campaign begins right after Labor Day. But in this case, I think when it really ends is with the first debate, which is scheduled right for September 11th. Is that correct?
I believe it's September 10th.
But when that debate occurs, you'll move into a serious policy debate. But Trump needs to keep really focused on immigration, inflation, and something that the Republicans understand and ordinary voters understand, but Democrats are downplaying, which is that real incomes have gone down. Not much, but a little bit. People are hard pressed. Credit cards are maxed out. This is not anecdotal. If you look at the statistics, people are really hard pressed, ordinary voters. The Democrats' answer to that is more spending. I mean, the $25,000 freebie down payment for a house is absolutely classic Democratic policy. You've got a problem, let's pour money into it with a specific beneficiary. The Republican answer wouldn't be a federal answer at all. It would be, let's work on making it easier to build housing, because that's the only way that the price of housing goes down. It goes down in two ways. You build more housing, and you get rid of inflation so that the interest rates go down. And that's a market solution. But Kamala Harris, she talks about McDonald's. What the Republicans ought to respond is that's the last job in the private sector she had.
She did lay out her economic proposal last week, and President Trump responded saying that went what he said full communist. He called her Comrade Kamala. Do you think, A, that's an effective attack, and B, what is his proposal to combat this? Do you think he's effectively laid out what his economy would look like?
Let's say what she's done, besides this targeted money for new home buyers, and I assume she's all in with wiping out all the student debt. The proposals that she laid out last week would spend between 1.7 trillion and $2 trillion that we don't have poured into this economy. It would be incredibly inflationary. Since then, when asked how she's going to pay for it, she said, I'm going to raise taxes, in effect, because the tax cuts under Trump will expire. And that will depress the economy. So she's depressing the private sector by raising taxes, and she's going to increase the public sector by spending trillions. That's really, I wouldn't call it communist, but it's full democratic socialist of the European variety. So it's what a European Democratic Socialist Party in Germany or France or Austria, whatever, would propose. Trump's counter proposals, he's running as the outsider. He's normally going to be relatively vague, but he has said, I'm going to save Social Security. He hadn't said how. He's going to end up, he's going to save Social Security, but he's not going to do any of the things that you would need to do to save it. He's going to simply kick that can down the road. He's going to not tax tips. Kamala Harris has borrowed that. And he's going to presumably renew his tax cuts. And unless you cut spending and regulation, you just won't have an economy that can pay for all that. But Trump, running as the outsider, is going to try to keep things vague. And his job is to pin the tail on the donkey.
This election obviously is still very close. We still have a lot between now and November. I had the privilege of talking to pollster Frank Luntz yesterday, and we talked about how before Biden dropped out, it was Trump's race to lose. Now he feels it's really Vice President Kamala Harris's race to lose. But we still have a few days left of the DNC. Where do you think she's weak as a candidate, and what do you think she should do to help overcome that over the next few days?
She's weak in, I would say, 3 areas. One is that she's attached to policies that voters don't like in the Biden administration. Secondly, her own proposals are vague, but they all center on huge expenditures that will double down on all the problems of the Biden administration. She said nothing about the border. That's one of the Biden administration problems. So she's going to be linked to that. And then the third is that she's a teleprompter candidate. She's running a basement campaign in plein air. That is, she's not willing to say anything that's not already scripted. And that's because when she starts speaking off script, so far she hasn't been very good. Now, she may be well prepared for the debate, and if she does a good job there, she'll avoid more debates and she'll avoid as many press conferences and sit downs as she can. She's not going to have sit downs with people who would ask her hard questions like you. She's not going to sit down with Brett Baer. She's going to sit down with, if her ideal interviewer would be Oprah Winfrey.
Well, the vice president is certainly welcome on this program anytime, any place. But I am curious, what are you looking for as we finish out the convention? Let's look beyond that between now and the debate and now in November.
I think the only question mark really is whether there will be a disorder on Thursday night, which is the next scheduled event for the protesters. Uh, I think that the big uncertainty going forward has to do with the Middle East and its effect on U.S. campuses. The more disorder there is, the worse it is for the incumbent party. I think the big question mark on the Republican side is whether Trump can discipline himself enough to focus on the issues which help him and hurt her. And and I think there's a question about whether the media will crawl out of bed. Uh, some of them appear to be sleeping, and the others appear to be in bed with the Democratic candidate. They're more partisan than they are journalists in many cases, and that was all exemplified by that cover of Time magazine, which looked, I mean, everything about Kamala Harris was there except a halo. I mean, it was really an embarrassment for a once great magazine.
Frank Luntz in the conversation yesterday did say that Harris really should be sending Trump flowers because Trump is essentially handing her this election. It is now Harris's to lose. Do you think that's true? I know all polling indicates it is still a very close race.
I think it is still a very close race. I actually think Trump has the advantage if he can pursue a disciplined campaign. That's not just because, in many ways, Harris is a weak candidate running on an unpopular past. It's really, in some ways, a base election, and that's what you're seeing, both sides trying to mobilize their base. The problem is that when each side mobilizes their own base, they alienate the other side's base. That was true I remember all the Republicans in 2020 saying, look, Trump has these huge rallies and Biden has, 6 people at a rally. How can he possibly win? And the answer is, if it was an anti-Trump rally, it would be as big as the Trump rally. It's just that, and that's what you're seeing now. Trump has a lot of people who will vote for him. Plus, there are people who are going to vote against the Biden administration. The Harris has a lot of people who are going to vote against Trump. What's been striking about the convention is that they're trying to build up a constituency for Harris, but she's a cotton candy candidate. There's a lot of fluff there. And if you bite into it, it just all collapses down. There's no substance that she's been willing to reveal. Name an accomplishment. Name a policy other than this huge spending policy. What's she going to do about the border? And if the Trump campaign can't prosecute that case, they'll lose. But if they can, they'll win.
Well, Charles Lipson, per usual, I appreciate the conversation. There's certainly a lot more to look out for. And as the election marches onward, I hope you come back on and break it down more. Charles Lipson, thanks so much.
My pleasure, Brittany.